Hello there, IDealaWorlders. Long time no speak, as they say. I've been meaning to do this video since before New Year's Eve, I think. I just kind of got carried away with life, as we do. And then a few days ago, I got a bit of a nasty message on one of my accounts. And it kind of prompted me and reminded me to get this video done. So thank you for that. But it occurred to me on New Year's Eve, can't remember what the exact date was. I think it was round about the 5th of January. So it was definitely either this week or last week. I can't fully remember. But it kind of reminded me that it's literally this year is 10 years to the date that I've been, how would I say, legal high free. Free from addiction of legal highs. Now, we all know, even though, legal highs got banned in this country, it was still perfectly feasible to get them from many other sources, get them from other countries. And, I think it's still happening now, all the counterfeit stuff that's sold on the street that's had a massively big impact on people's lives. So, I still could have partake, but, I did quit it and I stuck to that. Now, I'm not going to lie, people, I have had some other addiction problems since then, which we will get to. But I guess I wanted to come on here because, I wanted to make this video and kind of mark it in my own life as a milestone from being free from the addiction of legal highs for 10 years. That's a full decade. And that is something I am very proud of. Might be a bit weird for some of you to hear that. But, when I look back, at the time, this might sound so stupid, but I didn't realise I was an addict, Don't get me wrong, there was a medicative element there for me, and, back in the early days, talking like 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, I did find legal highs to be a much better option for me in regards to street drugs and the culture that comes along with that, inadvertently, shall we say. And last year, I got a late diagnosis last year with something, well, two things actually, that I never actually considered in my life. And I had such a grave misunderstanding of what them conditions were. I feel quite arrogant and, ignorant about, the thoughts I had about that since been on this little learning journey that I've been on. And like I say, I'm not going to lie, I've always been quite open and honest with people about who I am, the addictive problems I've had, even my mental health. I'm quite an open book for the most part. But upon getting that message, it led me to logging into this account. And unbeknown to me, I actually had some really good messages on there that I hadn't noticed or even read. And don't get me wrong, some of them were off 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. I don't know why I hadn't seen them because I've logged into the account since then. But some of them were off like a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago. And they were really nice. I don't know why I've just missed them. I've got quite a few accounts and got a lot of things going on these days, so, I probably just overlooked it. But it was mad to read, that the fact that, I think the shop closed down, I think it was round about December 2015. So the shop hasn't been for, over 10 years now. The website even went down for a couple of years, and then because of some health issues, which, we'll get to in some future episodes. I plan for this to be a regular thing now. Because of some health issues, I had to take it down, I think, near the end of 23 or 24. But it amazed me that, even after all this time, I'm still getting nice messages off people. Whether it be something as trivial as, the music you made helped me with my addiction. I still listen to this now. Or something a bit more grandiose, people just kind of sending me a message for my support back then and the help I give them. And I find it really mad that 10 years on, you know, people have took time out of their own day so far into the future to still send that message. I'm not going to lie, I was quite touched. It was nice to read. And, you know, looking back on the days of the shop, you know, don't get me wrong, I think 60% of it was brilliant. You know, I think 20% of it was okay. And I think 20% of it got very toxic, very ill, very bad. You know, and, you know, for the people that, you know, followed our IDealer journey from the beginning, I think we can all agree that the longer the time went on and the more kind of politics was imposed into the bands without knowing anything, you know, and I think I said this at the time, all it really did was eradicate all the good ones, the safer ones, the ones that weren't too overwhelming, the ones that weren't too addictive, you know. And when we first started IDealer, you know, we had customers all over the world. But when we opened the shop, you know, I always remember this, back in the first 2-3 years, you know, a lot of our customers, believe it or not, were police people. There were solicitors, there were psychologists, there were psychiatrists, there were people who needed to self-medicate in some way but didn't want to lose their kids. There was teachers, there was ambulance drivers. You know, we had a very, what I would describe as professional, hard-working clientele. But, you know, I think 3 bands later, you know, when stuff started getting a bit rife, a bit harsh, a bit strong, a bit long, a bit intrusive, a bit overwhelming, you know, all them good people kind of fell away and realised that, you know, these products were far too strong and getting a bit dangerous and very addictive. You know, it was hard for me to see that, you know, in the moment of that time, because I literally spent, 6 to 8 years testing all of these myself. You know, it was the nature of the beast for me. You know, I didn't want to sell anything that I hadn't tried or tested, you know. It's not a good thing to say. And I'm not showing off in any way, because it's just stupid, really. But, you know, for one reason or another, I have tried and took, you know, a lot of drugs in my life. You know, whether that be to kill the demons inside, so to speak, to deal with what goes on in here, to try and self-medicate, you know, whether that be, you know, mentally or with the pains that I suffer with, which is the only thing I ever spoke to people about back then. I didn't really know what it was, you know, my pains back then. It's just something I always had. I just got on with it. I didn't really register it as a thing. Probably because I was taking lots of drugs. But, you know, when I look back, it was a crazy time, wasn't it? And when I do look back on it, the early days were it was a lot more of a community. You know, it was a lot more best practice. It was a lot more people helping each other. It was a lot more talk, you know, a lot more conduciveness, a lot more, you know, people just trying to live, you know, a good, hard-working life. And what I mean by that is, like, say, like, we'll use the Lamborghini girls thing as a term. You know, like lasses, you know, they have a hard day at work, you know, they sit around and, you know, have a couple of glasses of wine, put the worlds to rights. You know, I suppose the male version of that would be, you know, working hard all week and having a couple of pints at the pub, watching the football with your mates. That is what Illegal Highs was like originally, you know, and whether people, you know, drink to self-medicate for that bit of relief, you know, have a bit of downtime, you know, that's kind of what it was, but it got so toxic and strong and rife. And I'll be honest with you, you know, round about the end of 2015, I had a massive nervous breakdown, you know. And even again at this point, I didn't realise I was an addict. In my head, I was like, but I work all the time. At this point, I was working 16 hours a day, you know, every day. And I mean every day. Very little time off. And, you know, and certain characteristics of my personality, certain thought processes, certain grandiosities and extremes, you know, I mean, I knew at this time that I had bipolar. And I thought I knew a lot about it. And I didn't really seem to see how much taking all of them drugs and having to test all this stuff affected me. Because in my head, I just needed to test it all to make sure people were safe, or as safe as it could be. You know, whether it's drugs, medication, alcohol, skinny jabs, like what we have now, anything. You know, there's always a certain degree of risk, isn't there? You know, whether that be short-term or long-term. But I honestly didn't see myself as an addict. And I had a very massively bad breakdown at the end of 2015. And subsequently, through other certain things, which we'll talk about in another episode, happened again in 2016. It even happened again in August 2017. So, you know, obviously these cycles I was going through with my bipolar, you know, whether that was just a bipolar or, you know, drug-related or legal high-related, whatever. Probably a mix of all three. I didn't see things for what they were, I guess. You know, when I first started IDeala, I had this vision of how I wanted to help people. And for the most part, we did that. You know, we use legal highs as therapy to get people off drugs and away from the bagged culture. And, you know, they then got to be part of a community of like-minded people who are also doing the same. And then when they were ready, we'd help them off drugs. But our community went further than that. You know, it became like a drop-in centre. It wasn't a shop. It was a community. It was a drop-in centre. It was a hub. You know, we help people with social services. You know, we help people off drugs. We help people get their kids back. You know, a lot of times we'd spend, you know, helping people with their CVs so they could get a job. You know, we'd help them with addiction issues. I mean, I'm not qualified in any way, but, you know, it was for a good long point, you know, during that time. We even turned into counsellors. You know, we helping people with their mental health, helping people with their addictions. You know, and, you know, obviously we borned out the Talk to Jacob service, you know, which was a very helpful resource for a lot of parents. And even young people like 18 to 25 would come on, ask questions about drugs, legal highs, addictions, even just mental health. We helped quite a lot of people through that website. You know, one of my biggest regrets is not keeping that website going. But, you know, with all the breakdowns I had, I just wasn't in a place to be giving people, you know, in a similar place to me, advice, in all honesty. And, you know, we birthed a herbal high ban kind of movement. We had a highly vigilant, which was our regulatory body. You know, we used to put posters up everywhere, even in the shop, explaining the dangers of legal highs, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes. And people used to say to me, why are you putting this up? You know, doesn't this go against, you know, the blueprint of your business? And I was like, no, this is the truth. You know, we live in a world where if people are going to drink, they're going to drink. If people are going to take drugs, they're going to take drugs. If people are going to smoke, they're going to smoke. But I guess I envisaged a world where people had the freedom and choice to do that, but with education, safety guidelines, best practices, how not to be ill. And for a good while we did that. But I think also, you know, like a lot of things on this planet, it was very mismanaged by the government. You know, and essentially in the end what they did was eradicate the people in the market that actually did care about their customers, their clients, the safety. And they felt like they had a duty of care. You know, there wasn't just me, there was a few others. But I always felt like I had a duty of care to my customers and society. But unfortunately, a lot of other people didn't. And it did take a kind of a nasty turn left where it shouldn't have gone. And I think that was perpetuated a lot by the government bans, because all they essentially did was get rid of the good ones. Now, I know a lot of people who are, you know, either against drugs or maybe don't know too much or had addiction problems themselves might not agree with that statement. And I don't say it lightly, you know. But that is essentially what happened. But then it left people with no alternative. And, you know, before the last ban came in, there was already so much counterfeit gear going around. And, you know, and that's why I went and did my, you know, the Vanilla Sky episode I did with Sky. It's why I went on BBC and ITV and explained all this. Why I went on Metro Radio. I saw this coming. And what happened was when everything got banned, people were just left with no advice, no education, no duty of care, no one who cared about them. And because the counterfeit stuff was already circulating before the final ban, that's what people used. But people didn't seem to realise that, for the most part, when they were buying, say, a smoking product, that was meant to at least have a synthetic cannabinoid in it, because that's what their brain wanted. Unfortunately, because there was no regulation or anyone that cared, what they were actually buying was what they thought was smoking material, which, that's what it looked like. But it had benzodiazepines in it, had Subutex in it. Now, benzodiazepines are typically something you would get, like, say me, if I have a really bad bipolar breakdown, I've managed to just kind of go crazy and sort all them out myself, But, when some people are sectioned or, they're really bad and they're under the duty of care of a psychiatrist, they get benzodiazepines to kind of get them through that. But it's usually a very short duration and in a controlled dose, and, they are monitored. Because it can be very nasty drugs. It can be a very, very, it can be a bit of a saviour, when you're that bad and that deep into it and you need, that relief, I guess. But that's what people were smoking. Imagine smoking a day's worth of medication in one joint of a benzodiazepine. That's going to mess you up, man. Even Subutex. I'm sure Subutex is, it's one of the kind of alternatives people get, isn't it? It's like, do they call it like heroin without the high type of thing? A bit like methadone, I think, and it's like the program to get people off things like, crack and heroin. And that's what people were smoking, There was no synthetic cannabinoids in these. That's why you saw people kind of standing on an angle on a corner, frozen in time, people being very violently ill. And then, I don't know how people were doing it, but people started injecting this stuff as well, man. It was bad. But, as it got to near that point, I think I closed my site down because I just didn't want to do it anymore. It's not what I stood for. It's not why I started it. Legal highs actually ended up being as bad as the drug world was on the streets before legal highs were even a thing. And it's mad, because a lot of people think legal highs was like this fleeting thing overnight. It wasn't. They'd been out since like 2000. It was just managed very well in a community of people who respected what it was, didn't let it rule their lives. But, like most things on this planet, once the media jumps on something that ends up telling a lot of irresponsible people about it, tends to get ruined. But the reason I made this video today, the reason I wanted to come on and make this video, is like I say, it does mark the 10-year anniversary of me being free from legal high addiction. And upon reading these good messages, I just wanted to come on and say thank you to everyone who was part of our community. People who buzzed off our music and the messages we tried to send. People who got involved with the business and supported us. People who supported our herbal high ban movement. People who supported our highly vigilant regulation tactics. I was watching one of the videos the other day. Can't remember the exact figures. But I used to have a lot of in with, certain police people, the council, and the ambulance drivers. I spent a lot of time regulating the town, pretty much single-handed by myself. Took a lot of time. And it's something I didn't need to do, But that was something I chose to do, because I thought it was correct. And, looking at the statistics, I think, in 2015, there was about 68 incidents of legal high problems in the town. And from the moment my shop closed and I had no influence on regulating anything, I think in the first 2 or 3 months of 2016, there was about 378 big legal high problems. So it showed that what I did made that difference. And that is something I will always be proud of. I brought light to an unsupervised, uncaring market. Now, some people could argue you just shouldn't have done it, and that's a valid argument. But when we look at the website, there was thousands and thousands of websites doing the same thing I was. When we look in the surrounding area of the locale of the shop, there was at least, another 15, 20. So if I hadn't have done what I did, everything would have still been the same. People would have still been buying it. People would have still been selling it. And it still would have been the market it was. But I brought care. I brought diligence. I brought vigilance. I brought best practice. I brought a voice to the market where I wanted to find a way of this being sensible, and this being safe, and this being a community. Not just a lot of raging, raggy addicts that want to abuse things. That's kind of how it went in the end. It's very disappointing for me. But, the stronger the stuff got, I guess most people with a bit of common sense kind of decided this wasn't for them anymore. And unfortunately, some people were addicted. But I guess that's pretty much the same as cocaine, crack, heroin, weed, amphetamine. So I guess for me, when I look back, I think for certain people, if legal highs hadn't have been there, they would have just abused something else anyway. If there's one thing I've learned in the last year or two is don't help people that need help. Help people that want help. And I know that sounds harsh, but people who need help often won't listen to you. But people who want help will action things because they want to get better. And I don't just mean that for addiction, I mean that for mental health as well. But I did want to come on and just say thank you to everyone, customers, clients, business supporters, events, people who bought our music, people who came to our events, people who managed to battle their addiction through our advice and support, people who got the kids back, people who managed to pave a new career for themselves, people who we did the little counselling sessions with. So I do want to thank you all for being a big part of that time of my life from me. Because there was some very, very special moments. And I'm sorry I couldn't do more. But I'm not a politician. I'm not a rich elitist millionaire businessman. I don't have any power or authority over the council or the government. We did what we can. For a while back, we did actually work with the council and with the police, but unfortunately they kept kind of dipping the toe in and dipping it out and dipping the toe in. So the consistency of support that we tried to build, also didn't unfold the way I wanted. But I am very proud of the work I did with that. And I think, that the market did need somebody who brought that viewpoint, someone who did care. And I would also like to thank all the people who did send the nice messages to this channel, knowing they would probably never get a reply, knowing it might not have even got checked. But for some reason, you took that moment out of your day to send that message. And I would just like to tell you that's been well received. Really did touch my heart a bit. Now, the other reason I'm making this video is I've been on quite a journey for the last 10 years, with my mental health, with addiction, with learning, growing, spirituality. Spirituality saved me. I would like to say that. No, I'm not religious. Spirituality and religion are very different. We'll get to that later. But I am planning to make more episodes on here. When I was doing IDeala, you probably see it when you look at the channel. It's only got 27 subscribers. It's not something I really push. No, I was never really into social media. Maybe if I understood social media more back then, maybe there was more I could do. But a lot of my job was quite hands-on then. And it's took me a lot of years to grow my confidence over the years. I think people back in the day always thought I was a very, because I was rich, I was a businessman, had all these businesses, I worked all the time, I knew a lot of people. You know, everyone just thought I was okay all the time, or that I was perfect, or that I could just manage. But it wasn't the truth. I struggled just as much as any of you that might have struggled at that time. I just had to be perceived as someone that could manage when they couldn't. And there's one thing I've learned in the last 10 years on my journey growing up, is that being true to yourself and finding self-acceptance and not lying to yourself, you know, and being strong enough to admit the flaws that you have, and being able to be in a state of being vulnerable and not seeing that as weakness, them things have really changed my life. So on this channel, you are going to be seeing regular videos from me. I am going to try and do 2 to 4 a month, because there's a lot of people, you know, when I look back, that I would really like to reconnect with. Now, I will apologise. I'm terrible with names. I can't remember a lot of your names. You know, I still speak to some on Facebook and stuff. You know, even on Facebook, you know, over the last 10 years, I've still had the odd message on there. You know, people just thanking me for their help and, you know, and that's nice. But it probably sounds stupid to say as someone in the 40s, but I don't know about any of you guys, but I feel like I'm an adult now. Now, that probably sounds really stupid, doesn't it? You know, like, you know, when you're 25, 27, 29, 30, 32, 35, 38, 40, you're an adult. You know, legally, morally, you know, as a system is, as you age, you are an adult. But I never really felt like one, you know. I felt like sometimes I was a child in a man's body just trying to do my best. But now I do feel like an adult. I don't know, maybe I had a midlife crisis, you know, Peter Pan syndrome kind of got washed away and I accepted that, you know, this is the reality of life now. Or maybe it's simply because, you know, I haven't been an addict for a while. I'm not sure. But I am going to put regular videos on this channel now. I'm going to try and do 2 to 4 a month, because there's a lot of you I'd still like to reconnect with. I would like to know where you are in life. I'd like to know what you are doing. I want to know how you've improved. And I guess, for those that don't know, you know, after my breakdowns, I was still kind of looking for ways to self-medicate and be better. Now, I had a really bad breakdown in 2017. And I remember as I came out of that breakdown, and I started getting a bit more compass mentis and, you know, trying to iron myself out, for want of a better word. I must have bought a bottle of CBD vape like 3 months before. Like, you remember when Can of Vape came out and they were just like the little cartridge pens? Well, I had a bottle of CBD vape, and I remember staring at it, you know, and thinking, what is this CBD stuff? Like, what is it? And then I went, after my kind of spiritual awakening, should we say, went down with a bit of a rabbit hole with it, and I must have just studied cannabinoids for like 3 months. And I thought, I'm going to try this. And I got some CBD drops. And I took them for 3 or 4 months. Disciplined as everything. Same time every day. 2-3 times a day. And I'm not going to lie, hands down, it is the best thing I have ever taken for my bipolar. Better than antipsychotics, better than any medication I've taken. You know, don't get me wrong, you know, things like Seroquel and quetiapine, which I know a few of you have used. You know, it's brilliant when you are in that deep state. You know, when you've had that breakdown. But then you get left on them and the NHS doesn't really help you or monitor you. And, you know, then they start making you ill again in very different ways. Turn me very aggressive and angry and very zombified. Much like some of the bad legal highs, ironically. So I had to find a way out of that myself. And after all the studying done, I was convinced this was going to help me. And it really did, you know. Now, don't get me wrong. I know we live in a very instant gratification type world. And, you know, when you have been an addict, you know, you do have this instant gratification type attitude, like, we'll take something once, twice, 3 days, 5 days and be like, this does not work for me, it's rubbish. But things like bipolar are quite high up on the scale of mental instability, and, sometimes, with natural supplements, they do take a while to work because they've got to change things in your system of how your body works, But I took this for 3 to 4 months, and hands down, best thing I've ever taken for my bipolar. So if you are struggling with mental health, whether it be bipolar, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, ADHD, autism, I would highly recommend it to you. I'm not saying that to make a sale. If you want to buy it from me, send me a message, I'll point you in the right direction. If you want to buy it from someone else, buy it from someone else. I honestly don't care. I just want you to be well. But give it a go, people, because it massively helped me. When I look back on my journey, had it not been for CBD, my spirituality, and a couple of people that helped me along, in finding myself and with my journey, I honestly don't think I would be where I am today. And as hard and as tumultuous as that journey has been, I don't think I would change any of it. Because, how can I say it? Sometimes we go through things in life and it hits us hard and it affects us and it can stay with us for some time. But if you were to erase all the bad from your life, you wouldn't have the knowledge and the wisdom and the clarity, the understanding and the learning of that experience, or who you are now, or how that has molded you into the healing part of yourself. And I think that's a very important part of our incarnation on earth. We get so bogged down by the stresses and strains of everyday life, we forget that we are human. We forget what the human experience is about. And largely that is why the system is set up the way it is. For us to be the furthest apart of being a human and experiencing the things of our humanity have to offer us. So if you are feeling down, you are struggling with your mental health, maybe you're even struggling with addiction, don't give up. You might just need to put a bit more work in. And the work is worth it. Because you're worth it. Because you matter. And things will always go wrong in life. We can't control that. The only thing we can control is our reaction to things. How we cope, how we deal, how we change, how we face. That's all we can do. But thank you very much for listening to the first episode. I'm going to try and do, like I say, I'll try and do 4 of these a month if I can. I've got a lot to do right now. So I'll definitely do 2 a month. I'll try and do 4. But if you do see this video, send me a message. Be nice to catch up. Be nice to reconnect. Be nice to hear about your journey. And I do honestly hope you are all well. And again, thank you for being a part of that time of my life for me. And thank you for being a part of our community. And in case any of you are wondering, yes, I do plan on releasing some music soon. A lot of you might think that, again, that I was this confident guy because I released music, did some singles and videos, very out of my comfort zone for me. Don't get me wrong, a lot of people I know didn't like the music I produced or made. But I really enjoyed doing that, it's some of the fondest memories of my life. And it's ironic now that, some of the people I listen to, like Tom McDonald and Dax, literally make music in the way that I was trying to make music back then. I wish I'd stuck to it, but I didn't have the confidence, I didn't have the ability, I didn't have the support, and I kind of thought, this isn't for me. But it's something my soul has never let go of. So I am going to be doing that. And I do like to speak through music. Now I'm going to end this video on one little thing. mainly as a reminder for me to understand what the next episode's going to be about. So as I said earlier, I got diagnosed with 2 things last year. We'll talk about it fully, on the next episode. But I got diagnosed with ADHD and autism in February last year. And, in some ways it was a bit of a plain sight, but in other ways it was a big shock as well. And it's been quite hard for me to deal with and quite hard for me to learn. But the reason I bring it up, because a couple of people did this, but I always remember the lady in the cafe next door. I remember she came up to me one day and she said, "What is the crack with you?" I was like, "What do you mean?" Thinking she was going to say something bad. And she said, "I don't understand with you." She said, "I see a lot of people buying these products." She said, "Don't get me wrong, some of them seem okay and just get on with the day. But a lot of them, it just seems to affect them quite badly." And at the time I was like, I don't know. Maybe they're just taking too much, or, they're ingesting it in ways that you shouldn't, or, for a lot of the case, like a lot of the footage you're seeing on the street in the news, there was always kind of portrayed as legal highs, but what you didn't see is that this person had drank like 6 pints and had a crack pipe and then had a legal high joint and weren't very well. You shouldn't mix anything really, should you? You're always going to have some kind of cataclysm, I guess. Which was like, you just seem normal. And I remember saying it like it was yesterday. And I used to think to myself, I don't know. Maybe I'm just all right, or I take it correctly, or I don't take too much. I don't know. But with finding out I had ADHD and having some of the cocaine addiction problems I've had, funnily enough, ADHD is treated with stimulants. So it is medicative to a point. But, having pharmaceutical grade, medication and the correct dosage and slow release and instance and, being monitored and, having therapy and, doing it the correct way is massively different from just abusing a compound. And I think that's why, looking back, I've had so many problems with cocaine, because when I've started taking it, it did help me. The small amounts, the sporadic days. But ultimately, your tolerance goes up. You take more, becomes more often, becomes more often. Now you're doing it every day, all week, all month. Now you're an addict. And this is the point your life gets ruined. And none of us really want that, do we? So I guess I'm saying that if you suspect you have ADHD, and that's an underlying cause of why you keep abusing stimulants, please use that money to go and get an assessment instead. Put yourself first. Look after yourself. I know it's hard when you're an addict. But try and break that addiction pattern and go and seek help. Because only through seeking help will you get support. And only through support can you find and understand yourself. And only through that, whether you take medication route or not, it's kind of where you need to be to get better. It's where you need to be to start healing. I promise you do. So please do it. But yeah, in regards to CBD, if anyone's got any questions, fire me a message. It's not something that's going to help you overnight. It's not something that's going to fix your life in a week even. It does require stamina. It does require consistency. It does require treating it with the same value and respect as if you just got antidepressants or quetiapine from a doctor. But invest in yourself. I am here to answer any of your questions. But I honestly do hope from the bottom of my heart, anyone that was a part of our community, if you find this video or you come across it, I do hope you're all well. And it would be brilliant and absolutely lush to reconnect with some of you. Hope you're all having a good day. Take care of yourselves and each other. Much love and peace from me. Bye-bye.